The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Read by Downey. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Party. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door, like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel, without smoke, with panelled walls and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors, after all. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly down but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles around called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another. No going upstairs or downstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these, wardrobes, he had whole rooms devoted to clothes, kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side, going in, for these were the only ones to have windows, deep-set round windows, looking over his garden, the meadows beyond sloping down to the river. This hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighbourhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they had never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of having to ask him. Well, this is the story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost his neighbours' respect, but he gained, well, you'll see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit, oh wait, what is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they become very rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height, smaller than the bearded dwarfs. Hobbits have no beards, though. There is little or no magic about them, except the ordinary everyday sort, which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colours, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes because their feet grow natural leathery soles and thick warm brown hair, like the stuff on their heads, which is often curly. They have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep, fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they try to have twice a day when they can get it. Now, you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, of Bilbo Baggins that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the 3 remarkable daughters of the Old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was something not entirely hobbit-like about them, and once in a while members of the Took clan would go out and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up, but the fact remained that the Tooks were not quite as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had many adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money. That was to be found either under the hill or over the hill or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in his make-up from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown up, being about 50 years old or so, and living in a beautiful hobbit hole, the one built by his father, which I've just described for you, until he had in fact apparently settled down immovable. By some curious chance, Once, long ago, in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast, smoking an enormously long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed, when Gandalf came by. Gandalf. Oh, Gandalf. If only you'd heard a quarter of what I had heard about him, and I have heard only very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his old friend the Took had died. In fact, and the hobbits had almost forgotten what he had looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on business of his own since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall pointed blue hat, a long grey cloak, a silver scarf over which his long white beard hung almost down to his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining, the grass was very green, but Gandalf looked at him from under long bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning? Or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good on this morning? Or that it is a morning to be good on?" "Well, all of them at once," said Bilbo. "And a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry. We have all the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful grey ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone around here." "Oh, I should think so in these parts. We are plain quiet folk of no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. Can't think what anybody sees in them," said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. Bilbo decided he was quite not his sort and wanted him to go away, but the old man didn't move. He stood leaning on his stick, gazing at the hobbit without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." By this he meant that the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things you use good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now you mean you want me to get rid of me, and you want me to move on, and you won't be happy until I move." No, not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir, and I know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know my name, though you don't know or remember that I belong to it. I'm Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be good-morninged by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door." "Gandalf? Gandalf! Good gracious me, not the wandering wizard to give old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered? Not that fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons? Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. I remember those. Old Took used to have them in Midsummer's Eves. Splendid they were. They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons and laburnums of fire and hang in the twilight all evening." You'll notice now that already Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe. Also that he was very fond of flowers. "Dear me," he went on, "not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures. Anything from climbing trees, visiting elves, sailing in ships, sailing to other shores even. Bless me, life used to be so I mean, you used to upset things so badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon. I had no idea you were still in business." "Where else should I be?" said the wizard. "All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I'll give you what you asked for." I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything." "Yes, Yes, you have, twice now. My pardon. I give it you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Yes, very amusing for me, and very good for you, and profitable too, very likely, if you get over it. Sorry. No, sorry. I don't want any adventures, thank you. Not today. Good morning, but... Please, yeah, come to tea, any time if you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye. With that, the hobbit turned and scuttled inside his green door and shut it as quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizards. Oh, what on earth did I ask him for tea for? He said to himself as he went into the pantry. He'd only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after his little fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door and laughing long but quietly. After a while he stepped up and with the spike of his staff scratched a queer sign into the hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode away just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think he'd escaped adventures very well. The next day he had almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well unless he put them down in his engagement tablet, something like Gandalf, tea, Wednesday. Yesterday he had been far too flustered to do anything of the kind. But just before tea time there came a tremendous ring on the front door bell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle, put out another cup and saucer, an extra cake or two, and ran to the door. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, he was going to say, when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf with a big blue beard tucked into a golden belt, and very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed inside, as if he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and, "Dwalin, at your service," he said with a low bow. Bilbo Baggins, it's yours," said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, I'm just about to take tea. Pray, come and have some with me." A little stiff, perhaps, but he meant it kindly. And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung his things up in your hall without a word of explanation? They had not been long at table. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake when there came another even louder ring at the bell. "Excuse me," said the hobbit, and off he went to the door. "So you've got here at last." Well, that was what he was about to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he had been invited. I see they've already begun to arrive," he said, as he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it, and, "Balin, at your service," he said with his hand on his breast. "Thank you," said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they had begun to arrive, had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as host, he knew his duty and stuck to it, however painful, he might have to do without. Yes, come along in, and have some tea," he managed to say after taking a deep breath. A little beer would suit me better, if it's all the same to you, my good sir," said Balin, with the white beard. "But I don't mind some cake, seed cake, if you have any." "Lots?" Bilbo found himself answering, to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off too into the cellar to fill a pint beer mug and to the pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes, which he had baked that afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them, when loud came a ring at the bell again, and then another ring. Gandalf for certain this time, he thought as he puffed along the passage, but it was not. It was 2 more dwarfs, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped, as soon as the door began to open. Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. What can I do for you, my dwarfs?" he said. "Killy at your service," said one, "and Filly," added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. "At yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. Dwalin and Balin here, I see," said Killy. "Let us join the throng." Throng? thought Mr. Baggins. I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink." He had only just had a sip in the corner while the 4 dwarfs sat round the table and talked about mines and gold and the troubles of goblins and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things that he didn't understand, did not want to understand, for they sounded much too adventurous, when Ding-a-ling-a-ling